Hello and welcome to this episode of Maurer Podcast. Artemis is terrified right now because we are talking about what I would call the passion trap, or what we're calling stop following your passion.
Very inspirational.
Poor thing, he's over there shaking in his shoes. He has not wanted to do this podcast because, it is true that millennials, they have had a bad rap. Some of it well-deserved. And it's every generation is that way. You have not invented anything with that. I want you to know that every generation forever has looked at the generation that's younger and gone, you do not know what you're doing. So there's this thing about, I need to find my passion and I want to live my passion and find my purpose. And it's too much pressure. When you're in your 20s, you cannot, yes, we all know the person who did that. In every generation there's been that. There's been the little girl or the little boy who knew from their very first ballet class that they were going to, do ballet and that was their life. And we all know about the entrepreneur who struck it rich really young. But these are the anomalies. Never before has a generation been so intent on finding their passion before the age of 20. I've never seen this before. And I do want you to know where this is coming from. So historically, what happened was, as humans, we spent all of our lives, almost every waking moment, on our survival. It was about just surviving. It was about getting ourselves food, making sure that we were clothed, making sure that we were warm, and having fresh water. This was really the purpose of our whole existence. As we move into the industrial age, we're able now to sort of separate kind of work and leisure. And work was still a very long time, maybe 16 hours, but it was separated. And we could work on one thing, not everything. So maybe we were working on, mining coal, but we didn't have to worry about growing oranges. And, we were working on one aspect and then purchasing the other aspects for survival. So we were specializing a little bit. As the generations progressed, each generation did better than the generation before. And we ended up with more and more leisure time until you hit, at least in the US, the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was this big reset where, that generation did not necessarily do better than the generation before. After that, each generation did do better than the generation before it. So after the Great Depression, there was World War II, where people were making a lot of money. And it was because there were a lot of people off into war. And then, the whole Rosie the Riveter thing, where there were a lot of jobs back in the U.S. to support the people at war. And then after World War II, you had the 50s, and then you had the 60s, and you had this hippie generation that was able to go and discover themselves, find themselves. And that was all because their parents had done very well, and they had money, and they had the luxury to worry about these kinds of things. So you progress into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Things go on, and each generation does better than the generation before, until you get to the millennials. The millennials are the first generation that are not expected to do better financially than their parents. There's still this sort of goal to do better. And what the millennials said is, okay, well, I'm not going to make more money, and I don't care. I don't even want to, which is fine. But what I am going to do is I am going to follow my passion. That's what I'm going to do. And what I'm saying is, that's a great goal. There is nothing wrong with that goal. But you put too much pressure on yourself where you think that your first job out of college is going to be your passion project. And that's not going to happen. It will happen for one or two. And millennials will look at, the guy who started Facebook, he did it. Well, that's an anomaly. Like in my day, we would say Bill Gates is an anomaly. An entrepreneur does not generally start a company and run it through being public. That is not the norm. We cannot use that as an example. What happens is, when you are in college or in high school, or just when you're young, you don't necessarily know what your passion is, and that's okay. And the reason you don't know what it is you don't know yourself well enough to know what it is, and you also have not seen enough of the world to know what it is. I'll give you an example for me. Like, one thing that I had somehow through high school had never heard of was really architecture. When I got to college and I discovered there was this thing called architecture, I thought, that probably would have been really good for me, but I had no idea that it really existed. And this is the kind of thing that happens, that there are, especially now that we're getting so minute in our in our specialties, you may not have any exposure at all to what you will find to be very exciting. So really, a lot of your 20s are just about exploring. Like, give yourself a chance to just explore. So what I would say is, rather than finding your passion or living your passion, start by saying, I'm going to follow my nose and I'm going to pay attention. So you get a job offer, you go in some direction and it appeals to you for some reason. Well, you go do that thing and do it in earnest. Don't, I'll say, well, it's not, I hear people say, it's not my passion. I didn't enjoy today. Well, guess what? You can be following your passion and not enjoy every day. I am absolutely following my passion with Jill Maurer, the brand, and also Maurer Limited. I love it. I love the design. Do I get to do design every single minute of every single day? No. There are bills to be paid. I do not like writing checks. I do not like the accounting end of it. I don't like dealing with the taxes. There are moments I don't like it. Still have to do it. Still following my passion. It does not mean that I'm not.
So how long did it take you before you got into design?
Forever. It took me a very, very long time. And now, part of that was because of my generation and the way that I was raised. So I was always kind of the middle of the road as far as right brain, left brain. I was very, very good at math, but I was also very good at English. And I knew that I wanted to start my own business. That much I did know. I always knew that. And so I thought I would go to business school. And my father, who's very left-brained, military fighter pilot, said, oh, no. You do not go to school for business. You learn business along the way. You go to school to learn something upon which to base a business. Fortunately for you, you're really good at math. You will be an engineer. So I was like, oh, okay. So I applied and I got into an engineering school, and that's what I did. And it was interesting because when I got there, I was good at math and I was good at doing it. But there were people who loved engineering. I mean, I just looked at them like, what? You love this? You're not doing this because you're good at math and are therefore obligated to do this? It was like this weird thing for me. Now, I still didn't know what I loved then. But having these experiences and paying attention is important, because it is also important to know what you don't love. I remember when I was young, my father, we bought a house and we were in Louisiana and it was hot. And we had to plant grass, and we went out there and we bought grass and we did these plugs and and it was miserable. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do anything involving landscaping. Okay, you laugh, but that's good information.
Yeah. It's good. It's good to know.
It's good to know. I don't know what I want to do. I know I don't want it to involve toiling in the hot sun in Louisiana. We're narrowing it down, right?
Right. So what were some of the earliest things that you, for instance, when I was really, really young, the first thing I wanted to be was a brain surgeon. And then I discovered that in order to be a brain surgeon, you have to deal with blood and cutting people open. So I was like, well, that's not for me. So maybe I should be a bone doctor, because that's just bone. And then I realized, you have to still go through blood to get to the bone.
Interestingly, I had a similar experience, because the other thing that people tell you or told me, now this is of course in the 80s, it was a different world, when you're really, really good at school, well, then you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? And that's how it was. And so I decided, I don't really want to be a lawyer, I'll be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. And I told this to my doctor, and he said, I'm going to tell you something that I wish I had known. I'm going to do something for you that I wish somebody had done for me when I was your age. I want you to spend the day with me and see what it's like to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell you,
changed your mind quick.
Absolutely. I did not want to be a doctor. And that doctor was a doctor and didn't want to be a doctor. But he didn't know until he, was well through medical school that he didn't want to be a doctor. Sometimes you can ruin a passion by making it a vocation. Because when you do that, then you do have to do the accounting and the math that goes, some of the things that go with that you don't have to now. And I did have that concern about jewelry. I thought, I've loved designing for friends. I've loved doing things. And if I make this a vocation, it could really ruin it for me.
I've always been an avid fan of basketball. And one of the things that it didn't ruin it, but it came close to ruining it for me was actually playing for my high school team. And most of it was because at that time in my life, I've always been an anxious person. So there was something about it being an organized sport with an official game that the second I would get on the court, I would just play horribly, and I would just end up riding the bench most of the season. But if I'm just playing with friends over the weekend, I'm a decent basketball player. It's just there was something about organized sports, whether it was camp, the school team, I just was never decent, and there was something about that added pressure of it's now official. It's not you having fun with it.
Yeah, my son had that same thing, interestingly, but it was for baseball. I mean, the kid could hit the ball over the fence all day in practice, but you got him into a game and he whiffed every ball. I do think that the people who are great at sports are able to, it's in their mind. The difference between a really good player and just a great player is mental, not physical. And being able to put themselves in a place of, I'm just going to play. This is just, this is just a game. I find it funny. I mean, in this job, I've worked with a lot of young people, and there's a lot of really, really, really talented young people who, it's this, again, with this pressure of finding their passion. And there's something about also thinking that they have to be an expert immediately. You don't have to be an expert immediately. It's okay to say, I'm finding my way, I'm learning this, I'm doing that. I mean, you're not going... I don't know if it's part of it, you're just used to this instant world, like instant food, instant photography. I mean, we used to have to we took pictures, then we took them to Walmart or wherever, and we waited a week and we got our picture. I mean, it's this instant... I don't know where this is coming from, but you do give yourself a lot of pressure. I'll go and I'll look for either, say, a graphic designer or maybe somebody to help with social media or advertising or something. And so many of the millennials who are skilled in these areas, on their website, they'll say, well, I only work with, companies who are giving back, or companies who are, a lot of times, I only work with nonprofits and companies. Basically, they're saying companies I thoroughly approve of, who aren't out there trying to make money and who are just doing good. Meanwhile, I want to be making money on this. I'm not here to just do good. So it's sort of funny to me where they think that they're sort of vicariously going to get the goodness because their clients are doing good or something. And what I would say to that is, it's okay to make money. You can use your skills to make money. Other people can use their skills to make money. And a lot of times, sometimes people see making money as bad. But in order to make money, you have to do something so well or create something that's so good that somebody wants to part with their money to get it. So in order to do that, you do need to create some good, right? You've got to... Now, you can't argue that you can do that in a negative way, but in an ideal situation, you have thought about somebody enough to create something that they desire enough to want to give you their money for it. So it's not inherently a bad thing to make money. And it's also a wonderful thing to be altruistic and go out and do things altruistically. Just because you have started a business where your clients are all being altruistic, that does not necessarily get imparted onto you. And I see that a lot, where somebody will decline anybody making money because they want to make money off people who are not making. It doesn't make any sense to me. Is that, my favorite quote? My favorite quote is, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who've come alive. And that's really about being engaged and when I decided to really focused my efforts on design, I felt this pressure. Part of the reason I didn't do it, especially designing jewelry, was I felt this pressure to make the world a better place and to follow my passion but I really felt this pressure to make the world a better place, and I wasn't sure how to do that, and I didn't see how designing jewelry would really do that. And when I read that quote, I realized, you know what? I am going to make the world a better place. And I don't know how. I really don't know how. And I don't need to know the details. But what I know is I come alive. I come alive when I design, and when I design jewelry, and when I design different things. And I don't know how I will make the world a better place, but the fact that I have come alive will do that. You know, at the end of the day, I may never know what I really did. So I read this article about a teacher who, she had been a career-long teacher, and she was dying, and she was lamenting that she hadn't made the world a better place, that she really had not been a success in life because she had not fulfilled her goal of making the world a better place. And one of her students learned this and called out on social media to everybody who had had her as a teacher to say whether she had affected them in any way. There was this outpouring from her 30 years of teaching students about how she had really, in some ways, significantly impacted their lives. And so she died knowing that she had fulfilled her desire to make the world a better place. Just because you don't have necessarily the tangible list of how you did it doesn't mean that you didn't do it. We often don't know how we've impacted other people. But what I can tell you is if you are approaching people and interacting people from a place of happiness and positivity and love for yourself, you can't help but making the world a better place. If you're miserable and, you know, panicked about whether you're making the world a better place, you're probably not going to. You know, so what I would say is just like relax.
Yeah, that's funny. One of the elementary schools I went to, there was a music teacher, and she has unfortunately passed away many years ago. It was chorus class. At some point, we had to do your typical end of semester presentation where we would rent out the local college. The kids would go up there, do 12 songs, the whole set. The parents would come. It was a whole ordeal. And at some point, halfway through the semester, she came to me because one of the things is we weren't just singing as a group. There also had to be 2 or 3 people playing like basic instruments to sort of just keep the flow going. And one of the things was a gigantic xylophone. She pulled me after class. She said, I want you to play the xylophone. And I was like, why? I hate this class. You know I hate this class. She looks at me and she goes, I can only trust you to play the xylophone. And I don't know, I still to this day don't know why she said that, but I ended up having to learn it. It was 4 notes. It was C, G, A, C, C, G, A, C, C, G, A, C for 3 straight minutes long. But it was fun, and I practiced it for hours. And, I eventually later on in life picked up piano by ear. I can't read sheet music, but I can play the piano pretty decently. It was my entrance into music. And to this day, I have no idea why she said that. My theory is she saw visibly, because I wasn't hiding it, how bored I was in that class, and she just wanted me to somehow have something to be passionate or excited about. And the one thing that she knew about me was that I was very meticulous, that I liked learning things. And so I think she pawned off the xylophone on me as a way to...
I think there's something else that she saw.
Yeah.
And I think that she saw that you take responsibility. And you take responsibility seriously, and you also have this kind of protect the pack mentality, right? And so she saw that you would take this on seriously, because what you were doing was not only providing that music, but probably the pace, and everybody leaned on you, right, for this. Mm-hmm. And so that you would take that responsibility seriously and know that it was important and that she could count on you to do that. And I think you've carried that forward.
It makes sense. I mean, it's stuck with me to this day. I still remember the entire flow. CGAC is going to be burned in my brain until the day I die. But yeah, it was my first interaction with music in a making it capacity, and I was like, oh, this is a learnable thing. I can do this. This is something I can enjoy. And so to this day, I score my own videos. I make music for different projects and stuff like that. I love it. So
that's wonderful.
There's something for that. So you're a designer now, but you weren't always a designer. So what are some of the ways that, let's assume in an alternative universe, you got into design immediately, right? How are you better because you were in other fields before design?
Okay, what I will say is, in retrospect, I realized I was always a designer. I didn't know that. I did start out as an entrepreneur very young, and I started thinking that I was going to, this was in the late 80s, I started thinking I had it all designed and figured out. I thought I was going to start a catalog company. Catalogs were big at the time. But not only was I going to have a catalog company, but it was all going to be handmade things that I discovered in different parts of the world. And not only that, but I was going to have everybody who worked at the catalog, most of them were going to be people who were challenged or handicapped in some way. And it didn't matter because they were in a catalog. So for example, if the person who answered the phone was blind, that wasn't a handicap in that situation. And you calling in would not know the person was blind, and it wouldn't matter. They could do their job. So I had this whole, we're in a wheelchair, whatever it was, because the catalog gave somebody that little bit of distance so that whatever their challenge was, they did not have to, you didn't have to be confronted with it, and they could be, quote, normal to you. And this was sort of my plan. Now, what happened was I was dating a guy in college, and I ended up, he had a talent, and it was a moment where the sort of the clouds parted, and I saw the mountain, and I was like, this is a very talented guy who knows how to do this coding, but he has no concept of starting a business, and clearly this is the business we need to start. And that's what happened. So, and he was the coder, and I did everything else. I was the marketing and the legal and the accounting and the branding and the whole thing. When I look back at that, I realize that was design. And I couldn't go anywhere without designing in my head. I always did it. I would go to the paint store, for example, and I'd need like wall paint, and I'd see the guy, and he'd be there at the counter, and then he'd, kind of walk around this wall and go back into the back, and he would get this, this paint, and then he'd bring it up, and he'd find the colors, and while he was doing, and he'd mix the paint. While he was doing all of this, I'm thinking in my mind, this is not a good plan. What they need is a hopper for the paint. They need a hole in the wall. He just gets the paint from the hopper. I just did it wherever I went. When I would go on vacation, I would drive people nuts because I'd sit there and go, you know what this town needs? This is what it needs. And if it had this, you could make a lot of money. And you'd put it here because this is what everybody needs here. And I was just always designing. So entrepreneurship, as it turns out, is designing. And I think that that's what I bring to the table of design that a lot of people don't, is to recognize that design truly is everywhere. That by being human, you are a designer. And maybe to some different levels, but these people who say, oh, well, I'm just left brain, I can't design. That's not true. I worked with coders who were great coders who thought they were completely left brain. And there was beautiful design in their code. And because I was middle of the road enough, I could see the design. Like I couldn't do what they did, but I knew enough to appreciate what they did. And so I think that's kind of how I got here. Where I struggled was in giving myself the permission. I still had that in my head of, my father saying that art and design and beauty are not important. Fortunately for you, you're good at math, and so you're able to do what's important. And I had to shun that and allow myself to focus more on the design and beauty aspect. Now, understand that is not the right answer. That's his bias. There are people, like if my parents had been famous musicians, they may have said, oh, goodness, don't mess around with that math stuff. That stuff, what's important in the world is art and beauty and music. There is no right or wrong answer. It's all about bias and about, just finding your own path and finding your own way. So it was a very long-winded way of saying, I think I was always a designer, and it was just about giving myself the permission to call myself a designer. So that was today's episode of Maurer Glass Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. That's it for this week, and we look forward to seeing you again on Maurer Glass Podcast.